Thank you for having us.
All right, I'd need to Asiamna Sietya Enthapet, Kevin Brand. Good morning, friends and respected ones. I want to open by just introducing myself as Kevin Brand, and I'm going to be the first one to speak here, as introduced by Kevin there, and thank you for the introductions. I'm the current principal of Bayview Elementary School here in Nanaimo. I want to begin by acknowledging that we come to you from the traditional territory of this Nanaimo First Nation. We live, work, and play on this territory, and for that we are grateful and continuous learners. We're going to walk through our presentation in sort of a stages where you're going to hear different voices and different perspectives on the same project. Some of us have been with the project for several years, and some of us have come in either midstream or just recently. My perspective is from one of the original focus schools, which there were 4 focus schools at the start of the project. And so in my school, we're entering the 4th year of the project. And I've been at that school for 2.5 years. I wanted to first show a slide that brings to light the children. And one of the messages that I wanted to share from the get-go here is that our work is truly about the children at our site. It gets down to that core unit of the child as a learner, and it really focuses in on what that student needs, but specifically starting from a place of strengths. In this picture, we've got a student who's currently in grade 2 reading to a diverse group of kindergarten students, and it originated because of some great work of teachers acknowledging that this would be a stretch for this student, that she had just made some beautiful gains in her reading, and that having an authentic audience would be something that would really move her forward. And it comes from that strength. So that day she put on her special dress. She talked to her mom about how she was Mrs. So-and-so today. And she delivered on that. And her little spirit blossomed that day and beyond. I also wanted to just share with you the interrelatedness with which we're looking at children. A couple of years ago, my staff at Bayview had a real breakthrough, and it came from our child, youth, and family support worker who has Anishinaabe or Western Ontario Aboriginal ancestry. And she came to us as we were seeking to find a model or a lens to base our views on kids on a strength-based model. And what we wanted to first do is acknowledge that those children that we see as our struggling learners are not broken by any stretch, but rather their current strengths and their current areas of need might be things that we need to explore more deeply. We have in my school a very diverse population. 40% have Aboriginal ancestry. We did a snapshot in February and realized that in the past 1 year of time, 37% of our students had undergone a major transition, meaning they'd moved into our neighborhood or started kindergarten or transitioned from out of country. In our school, we also have 13% international refugees, specifically Syrian refugees who are newcomers to Canada. And when you're looking at that type of diversity, it's easy for staff to feel overwhelmed. It's easy to feel like there's no possible way we can address all of the challenges that are coming our way. But through the Aboriginal lens and through the medicine wheel lens that you're looking at there, we were encouraged to consider emotional, spiritual, physical, and mental. And just to sort of touch on each of those areas briefly, emotional is that ability for a child to be resilient as their life circumstances come their way, to be able to deal with their emotions in a healthy way. Spiritual is that vital one, that sense of belonging in a school, in a place. And we all know as adult learners how our own learning is deeply impacted by the comfort we feel with the class and with the people around us. So that sense of belonging in a school is that spiritual piece. We don't want to shy away from the word spiritual because of the connotations with religion. We want to dive into it in terms of that sense of who am I and who am I in relation to this place that I'm at. Physical is all that good work that Stuart Shanker and others have done in the province recently. It's that comfort in place, that ability to regulate our bodies and to be able to create spaces in classrooms that a child can be comfortable in. But we all know that movement breaks are a necessity for some children, where other children are just very comfortable in whatever setting we put them in physically. And then mental is sort of that traditional domain of academic learning. And we know that that's either going to be something that really stands out for a child, or is often an area that we say, oh, wow, this is overwhelming, the need in this area. But when we're able to first identify the strengths, it really does connect that likely that need that that child has is interrelated to some other areas of their development. And we can then take a more holistic approach to designing interventions to address the reading challenges that they're having. The other image that's up currently right now is an image that we have adopted in our district around reconciliation. And what I bring to light this image because what it speaks to in terms of the truth it gives our staff is that wellness was something that was on this land prior to contact. And through a lens of reconciliation, it says that our Aboriginal communities are not communities that need to be fixed or we need to bring something to, but rather taking those students and having them go deeper into their own understanding of who they are and what this place has, and speaking with the elders is that avenue to health. And so in that sense, we are allies as we walk with community in doing that work for our Aboriginal learners. And of course, that then in turn impacts all of our learners, including those students that are new to Canada with Syrian ancestry. It's the same work. It's about diving into who that child is and what this land and the teachings on this land have to offer. So moving forward, I'm going to hand off to Laura Tate. Laura Tate is my boss and assistant superintendent for elementary schools here. And she will give a bit of a high-level talk about sort of the origins of the project and from that district perspective. So thank you, Laura, and you're up next.
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you for laying that beautiful foundation. My job this morning for the next few minutes is really going to be to walk us through some of the more specifics and logistics of the Focus Schools project. Now, about 5 or 6 years ago, prior to me becoming an assistant superintendent, I was a district principal for Aboriginal education. And this is the time where the Focus Schools notion really began to percolate. So some of you may remember a Ministry of Education project called Changing Results for Young Readers. Well, that came out to the province and we created our own version of that called E to 3, meaning early years to grade 3. And during those years, we really dug down and focused on K to 3, actually strong start to grade 3 reading. And we learned a lot. We learned a lot from our teachers. We learned a lot about each other. We learned a lot about our district. At the same time, here at the board office, we were really thinking about a few of these things and watching these teachers learn about reading and learn about teaching reading. And we know that likely if a child isn't reading at grade level, isn't feeling really good about reading by the end of about grade 3, beginning of grade 4, they're likely not going to graduate. And so it's a pretty clear area to focus on. It's going to absolutely affect the life chances of a child if we can support them to love reading and to feel confident in their reading in these early years. So in some digging, looking at sort of broad data, looking at demographic data, poverty, the early developmental index, the vulnerability index, looking at report card marks, taking and paying special attention to where our Aboriginal students, in which schools they were in, whether they were coming in off reserve, all of those sort of components helped us to choose the very first 4 focus schools. And Bayview Elementary, Kevin's school, is one of the first schools in that cohort. So overarchingly, our goals were, well, they were quite simple but quite complex, that we were focusing on reading. And of course, we wanted to pay special attention to our Aboriginal student data as well. So we have been learning, we continue to learn and practice what we know to be response to intervention, primarily really focusing on learning and honing our tiers of intervention. As well, we wanted to pay attention to really differentiating our instruction in our classrooms to have teachers feel really confident about being able to meet the needs of their students in their classrooms. And so through that, the focus schools really focused on building capacity. So any kind of extra supports that were placed in these schools really were to support the adults. And I know that might feel contradictory or might not feel, it might feel a little sort of different than you might think, but we felt that if we could focus on the adults in the system, we'll have larger efficacy, sustainability, because as we all know, resources often can come and go. So we didn't want to spend, parachute in, you know, quote unquote, fix a small group of students, and then we leave again, having not paid attention to the folks, the adults in the system. And then lastly, in an effort to demonstrate transparency, or in other words, to really share with the other 23 or 24 schools what we're learning, we tried to pay attention to sharing what we're learning and what we know. So some of the benefits or some of the resources we were able to share with the 4 focus schools originally really was the opportunity to be connected with one another, and to have time together to collaborate, learn, and cry, and support one another. So first and foremost, one of the largest culture shifts and practice shifts was having a literacy specialist or a reading teacher in each of these 4 schools. So the reading teacher is half time at each school, so they go back between 2 schools, but also providing that connector between those 2 schools, which has been really, really successful. Throughout the 4 years, they've been able to receive resources, books in classrooms and libraries. We've increased principal and vice principal time. We've increased counselor time, child youth family support worker. As well, we've had resource funding and a focus from Aboriginal education. And essentially, the expectation that I had of these schools was really to be open, to be vulnerable, to be ready and able to risk and to lead their staff in doing so. So we met regularly, we shared with one another, we shared data, which in our district, we didn't have a lot of district-wide data, but at the same time, we were building and have now built a district-wide reading assessment, and sharing that was a real huge place of vulnerability for us. So that's another big success for us. As well, we really supported folks to dig down and to help them understand, but then to share with us to understand how this data was utilized to make decisions, to make teaching decisions, to make structural or systemic decisions, and as well to really look at, again, RTI, response to intervention, and how those tiers of support were ebbing and flowing and being supportive to what we were trying to do. So after our first 4 years, the 4 focus schools, we report to the board every year. We've made success, we've made great gains, not only in specific reading data, we're closing gaps between our Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal students, but I think in the foreground is really this culture of collaboration, how we see students, how we see reading, analyzing our beliefs and values around reading. And so this year we have been able to add 8 more focus schools, all receiving the same sort of support. In fact, probably greater support because we have more connection points, and we're quite proud about this shift. So I will be turning the mic over to Olivia Densmore, and Olivia and I have been working together for quite some time. She is one of our longtime literacy coordinators. So welcome, Olivia.
Hi. So my role as a literacy coordinator is a little bit different than curriculum support teachers in most other districts. Myself and my 5 other colleagues work embedded in schools, and what that means is that we're participating in staff meetings, school-based team, and we're working daily, side by side, along teachers, helping them with their planning and implementation of their literacy program. So we often get questions about what we do as literacy coordinators. So we're just going to share this brief Powtoons about some of the things that we're trying to do in schools. So those are some of the day-to-day things that we work on in our schools alongside with our teachers and our administration. But we also support our admin with collecting and analyzing
You need to get things done.
Oh.
Monday.com, it's easy, fun, and simple. Just add the workflow.
Okay, sorry about that. Where did our slides go? So one of the things that we also do is support with the collection and the analysis of data. And so this first graph that Kevin's pulling up here is
drag it over to the other screen.
the first graph that you're going to see in a minute here shows our district data. And so this was our context at the beginning of the Focus Schools data, at the beginning of the Focus Schools project. This was our
Sorry, Kevin, can people see this in Vancouver? We've had a shift in our screens.
Hi, Kay, we're seeing the presenter view.
Yeah, okay, that's what I was worried about. I'm sorry, folks. I'll just have to switch it. We thought we had a plan after the Powtoon, and it got us caught up here.
No problem.
oh, there it is.
Yeah, there it is. Okay. So we want to.
It's still that screen over there. Just
Yeah, I know. We should be able to do it from current slide here, though, right? There we go. We got her. Sorry about that, folks.
Can everyone see that now? I think so.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
we're good.
So this is our context on the left of our grade 3s, our report card data prior to the Focus Schools project. And then 3 years later, these are our students exiting grade 3. And so what we notice is a positive shift, a wave of students moving towards proficient and extending. So we're really excited about that data. As a district. And I think this data was really helpful for Laura when she was presenting to the board and asking for money. But from a school-wide perspective, it didn't really matter that much to me because I was more interested in the individual student stories and what was actually happening to our students in our schools. So this graph represents the individual journeys of the students. Each horizontal bar represents an individual student, with the scale across the bottom representing text difficulty based on the PM scale. The horizontal or the vertical black bars represent the goals of where we hope students approximately would be at the end of grade 1 and grade 2. And what we notice is that after grade 1, only 13% of students were meeting or exceeding expectations. And so that's represented in the maroon bars. And then we notice that if we continue to monitor those students in the yellow bars in their grade 2 year, almost 75% of the students are well on their way. So we're pretty excited about that data. But we wanted to look a little bit further. So we examined another cohort. So this next cohort is our 2026s, our grade 4s of last year. And we see similar trends where longitudinally more students are meeting and exceeding meeting or extending their expectations. And so we're excited about this data, and we use this data in our schools to celebrate the individual student journeys. We also talk about the different rates of acceleration, and so we notice that no bar is identical, and so we also use this to celebrate the ongoing monitoring of student learning, and so we're pretty excited about this data, and we use it a lot in our schools. Now, excuse me, so far up until this point we've talked about kind of district-wide data, and then we've looked at our individual student journeys within our schools. This year we looked at 1 year, and we broke it up into different chunks. So the pink bars here represent our children that were in the different report card categories in the fall. So these are our grade 1 students for all focus schools, so 12 schools in Nanaimo. And so the fall represents our grade 1 data, and then the blue represents our mid-year report card data. And so again, we notice a wave trending in a positive direction where more students are moving towards proficient and extending. And so this is something that we're really excited about, because we know how much work goes into moving a child towards the right. Moving a child from emerging to developing represents an accelerated learning trajectory, which we're really excited about. And so what we hope is that at the end of this school year, so our June report card data, we hope to continue to monitor this cohort as with our other cohorts, and hopefully we continue to see a positive trend. What we did with this data is we actually further disaggregated it into different schools, into the individual focus schools, and we also looked at individual classes and looked at their report card data. And what we did in many of our schools is we actually put names and in some cases faces to the students in the emerging and developing categories. And what we used that data for was to facilitate multidisciplinary conversations, including our SSTs, our ELL language teachers, our administrators, in consultation with our classroom teacher. And we wrapped around these students and made sure that we are planning cohesive supports for these students to ensure that they continue to move in that positive direction. So that's it for data for me. And so I'm going to introduce Carrie Steele. Carrie Steele is a principal at Ladysmith Intermediate School. Ladysmith Intermediate is one of our 2.0 schools, so they're new to our Focus Schools project this year, and uniquely they're the only intermediate school. And so we're learning a lot from her, and so she's going to share a little bit about her story.
Morning, everyone. So yeah, I'm the new kid on the block with this project. So we came on board in September. We are the only school focused on grades 4 to 7 for this project. We don't have primary learners in the building, so we had to figure out a different launch point. One of the things that we learned really quickly at the beginning of the year is that we needed to get on the same page about all manner of things, not just about how we approach reading. So what you're looking at on the screen right now is some work we did in September around doing some visioning together. The image at the top is part of a path process. So we talked about our dream for our kids. What, you know, if we've accomplished everything with them and for them that we want by the time they leave us in grade 7 and head to the high school, what will that look like? So we had a lovely vision of, you know, again, going back to the intention of this project at the beginning, there is a focus on reading, but we do want to focus on the whole learner. So who would we like those people to be if we're supporting them on their way through? So we took a look at that, and then we worked on a new vision statement together, which is what you're seeing in the bottom picture there. And just really made a decision that we needed to keep the whole child and the whole school community in mind moving forward with this work. And to grow as a team, there was, I mean, I was new there this fall. My student support teacher is only in her 2nd year at that site. Our literacy coordinator was new to us, and about 1/3 of the teaching staff is in their 1st year or 2. So we had some just getting to know each other that we needed to do as well. So the other piece was that we needed to kind of figure out where we wanted to start. This is a huge conversation, and just trying to understand where all the pieces fit and how we wanted to approach things at the beginning was just lots and lots and lots of dialogue and reflective conversation together. So we did some reading together. The Every Child Every Day was an article that we really spent some time with and tried to figure out, how do you do that? How do you have 27 or 29 learners in a classroom and really know what's going on for everybody individually? What's different about supporting literacy instruction for intermediate learners from kids that are just beginning their journey? And is it similar supports and interventions, or is it something different that you need by grade 4? So we looked at lots of literature and articles together. We did some jigsawing and some reflection and conversation and shared resources and all of the things that you do when you're having those kinds of conversations. Words Their Way was a tool that just kind of resonated with people. It's definitely not, it's not reading. It's about word study and vocabulary building. But what it gave us was a common platform for conversation, which was fantastic. So we do have a group doing an inquiry around that this year. And we almost never just talk about Words Their Way when we sit down. We have really rich conversation about literacy more globally in our classrooms. So that's been a really nice touchstone from that perspective. The district is doing lots of work with elementary PLC teams this year, so it was a good opportunity for us to really thoughtfully structure PLC and make sure that one session built on the next. We've been trying to balance work that's done whole team and work that's done small group this year, and really anchor ourselves in our data and what we know about our kids as we move forward. We're talking lots and lots and lots about RTI this year. Tiered intervention is something that's still growing at my site, so understanding the difference between universal supports and opportunities and just building classroom environments that allow for the exploration and the deep experiences compared to where we're taking kids to school-based team and introducing some tier 2 or 3 supports. Ongoing conversation, but it's people are really proud and excited of the work happening in their classrooms, and so that's been really valuable to explore as well. So tools and approaches were another piece. Again, that idea that learners in grade 4 to 7 may need some different tools than what we would provide for our little guys, and finding literature that didn't have pictures that were too young or juvenile for our older kids was really important too. We wanted them to feel honored with the books that were in their hands and happy to be engaging in that stuff. So we did lots of conversation around those resources. We were supported by the district with quite a few things, and we did some of our own shopping, doing some research with our literacy coordinator together as well. We also took a look at some other things. We've done some class reviews this year a little bit differently than how the sites handled them in the past. We deliberately plotted them on the pyramid so we could take a look at the tiered supports. And when we did it in the fall, we were really still having lots of conversation about what fit in which tier and why we would put it there. And by our February conversations, we were a lot more confident in that. It was exciting to hear the conversation between the teachers and the support team and just kind of figuring out how all that fit and what next steps looked like. Our literacy goal is this big, giant, open-ended thing because it was owned by the different teams really thoughtfully. They were looking at the different grade levels and figuring out how we could support things. So our first our first PLC stretch was done in grade levels. So our grade 4s were looking at, improving comprehension and connections, and our older kids were looking at fluency. Our grade 7s were looking at building independence. And so we did that kind of as grade level groups. And then in our second wave through, that heat map was about drilling down a little bit more. So we've done kind of the broad strokes thing together in the fall. Now we had cross grade groups looking at the next layer of things and how they could support colleagues in other classes and things with the learning that they've done. Now that we're approaching the end of the year, we've come back together and we're doing some whole group stuff around what did we learn? What is our year looking like? What's our data showing us? We've had some pretty exciting results in a couple of our classes, and a big piece of that is the collaboration between the literacy coordinator and the classroom teacher, and they're really celebrating that connection and celebrating the experiences of the kids. So we're really excited to be looking at next year and how we're moving forward with that stuff. And then the last piece for us, which I've touched on a little bit, was the data. We had seen the district data over time, and we knew what was being collected across the system. it's taken some kind of coming and going to figure out what fits for us and how we like to look at things. So we do have the Nanaimo Ladysmith NLPS assessment that looks at reading across the grades in the fall. So we have that data from the fall, and certainly our kids that we had concerns about will be looking at it again this spring. We have all kinds of benchmarking data. We have writing samples. We have our Words Their Way data that we've been collecting. But another big piece for us was looking at the culture and energy in our building. And so we've also been looking at student learning survey data. We've been looking at just referrals to the office and what kinds of things we're processing with kids there, what kinds of conversations are we having, what kinds of supports are coming out of that. We also, as part of the Focus Schools initiative this year, we're asked to pick a case study student as a school, building on the work from the Changing Results, where we know that focusing intensely on one learner teaches us things that we can use with other kids. We opted to do that with every staff member this year. So we each picked a student that we were concerned about, that we wanted to learn more about and focus on. And we're just now coming back in. We've been doing it as a bit of a touchstone through the year, but we're just now creating the bigger picture of how our case study students have fared this year. And people are intensely connected to those kids and really want to do the things that are good and supportive for them. And so there's lots to celebrate there, because I think we have had a really good lens on some of our more vulnerable kids all year. And it's, we're seeing that it worked. We're seeing that building those relationships was really valuable, and that we're seeing growth in those kids, and we're seeing connection to school in those kids that's really, really wonderful. So just summarizing, that was our focus year one, just learning how to be strategic, how to be really reflective, knowing it's recursive. Nothing is ever just one conversation. We've had to come back again and again and just make sure that where we started is where we want to be continuing, and we'll continue that conversation going into next year. And just really learning how to do it together was super important. You cannot teach in isolation and do this work well. So that's a piece that my team's really valuing now and seeing it's important. And so we're looking forward to next year and seeing where things will go. Okay, so I'm going to turn you back over to Kevin for a couple of little pieces, and then we'll be ready for questions.
Thanks, Carrie. So just in summary, we brought together a few points here. The nature of collaboration is vital if you're going to be moving forward students with pretty significant challenges. And we think about the cultures and relationships. So it's not only how staff work together, it's how staff view and work with children, and staff view and work with families, and the trust that's established through consistency and through, I think, that strength-based lens. Response to intervention, we've talked about, but we have a gift of PLC time in our district, which is 20 days per year of 1 hour after school committed to professional learning time. And that structure, that support in place allows us to move forward this work in really authentic ways, honoring the teacher time together to do the good work. And then at our school-based team is that central hub that is sort of that leadership, the learning leadership within our building, and the hub through which all of sort of this work goes through. And it's important that that be a very healthy, open, honest, transparent group of professionals. The idea of a school-wide commitment, I think, speaks for itself, and that there must be a commitment for teachers to understand that their knowledge must increase, that our understanding of the brain, understanding of students' development is constantly changing, that we need to keep ahead of that, or at least with it, for our own professional learning, and that that's something that with humility we all need to be engaged in, including the school leadership. And then, as mentioned before, it's such a deep passion of mine at my site, given our context, but really that understanding of our Aboriginal students needs to be there for every person in the building. And that is head knowledge, but it's more importantly heart knowledge. It's that understanding of where we situate ourselves in the journey of reconciliation and the responsibility to the Aboriginal peoples of Canada. So those pieces all are sort of summative in terms of what we've learned, but I hope that something has sparked maybe some questions or feedback that you could then bring to us, and we could continue this conversation through some questions. So that's what we've got set up for next.
All right, well, thank you, Kevin, and the rest of your team for presenting. And so if you have any questions to our participants, just put them in the question box, and I will pitch them to our presenters. But I have a few questions of my own, if you don't mind. First off, thank you for a very informative, engaging webinar. And I really appreciate how your leadership with your district has really targeted and focused on the whole child. So what I've heard is focused on literacy support and really doing deep dives in the data, also creating these collaborative structures and really focusing on accessing the collective wisdom within the schools to ensure that you're responsible for all student success, not just the kids in your classroom as well too, but also really interested in connectedness. And so a question for all of you, and you may have different answers for this, as I have come to understand your really pretty significant wraparound approach to providing supports and services for kids. You have lots to celebrate in terms of your successes. Do you feel that increasing academic student success does then translate to increasing connectedness to the school, or is the opposite true? Is it increasing connectedness to the school that positively impacts student achievement?
For me, it's both ways at the same time. It's you really do have to go for that whole child approach right out the gate. That, I mean, if you're not feeling success with your learning, then you're not going to want to sit there and be a part of things all day. But also, if you're not feeling that connection to the school, you're not going to commit to the processes in the classroom. So it's different kids, we focus different ways depending on what their way in is. But yeah, to me, it's a big circle. I can't really, the entry points every direction. I don't know.
Very personalized.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would also suggest that those things aren't binary, but I think one of the things that is really important within that conversation is sort of the adaptive nature of instruction and relationships of teachers and people in the building, is really being in tune with that child and recognizing what is the hang up at this point. And it's not always going to be the same thing, but the more we know our children, the more we understand that or can tap into sort of who that child is as an individual, the more equipped we'll be to bring the right intervention or even just that gentle prodding at the right time. There are times when it's obvious, right? There are times when there's a major thing going on in a child's life, and that information will come to our team, and just humanity tells us this is not the right time to be doing an academic task with this child. And so we do have the responsiveness to be able to address those social emotional needs first, and then walk along that journey with the child. But the message that we continually give back to our staff is that idea of that low floor, high ceiling, where we provide academic tasks or entry point into that academic piece that's going to allow for a child to be there and be present and to perform where they're able to perform, but also never lowering the bar for that endpoint. And I think in that way, those two things are constantly interacting.
Thank you. So I really appreciate the work Nanaimo has done around creating collaborative cultures. I, in my own principalship time, was heavily involved in that, and I do have a significant bias when it comes to this. So I think, yes, lots of schools have collaborative time, but I would say that you really could